Turn, O virgin daughter of Israel, to these your highways by which you went. Welcome to Reunion Roadmap, a place to discover the people and communities along the highway of restoration for Israel's house of Joseph. Reunion Roadmap is a B'nai Yosef North America production. Be our guest for the next hour as we meet the people of the emerging house of Joseph here in North America.
Welcome to another edition of the Reunion Roadmap. This is Al McCarn, Executive Director of B'nai Yosef North America. Along with me is our Communications Director, Zefania Pappas. Zefania, you did our interview this week, so why don't you tell us who you talked to?
Well, Solomon Lopez, he is actually from Corpus Christi, Texas. Our listeners have become familiar with him through listening to his music, which we've showcased several times.
Yes, and we're going to showcase his music quite a bit today. In fact, we've got some music that he has not previously released, new versions of one song, and a couple of instrumental pieces, which we'll play on the second half of the show. Now, I remember meeting Solomon 2 years ago at the South Texas National Shabbat in New Braunfels, not far from San Antonio. He was our worship leader at that occasion. And that's where I first heard his music. It was a great blessing to all of us who were there, and I trust it has been a blessing to our listeners here on Reunion Roadmap over the last few months. But I think we will find in Solomon's story that he's more than just a gifted musician. In fact, Zefania, it surprised me to learn that he didn't even become a musician until he was in his 20s.
Yes, that was very surprising to me.
So let's go on down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and let's hear the story of Solomon Lopez.
Welcome to the interview portion of Reunion Roadmap. I'm Zefania Pappas, and we're going to Corpus Christi, Texas, to interview Solomon Lopez. Solomon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, shalom, Zefania. So I guess a little bit of what I do. I'm a songwriter devoted to kingdom-based music, focusing on the written word, sanctification, and the regathering of all the people of Israel, or as we are calling it as B'nai Yosef. In my current field of work, I am in the financial industry. I work in credit union management, so it allows me to stay connected to the local community here in Corpus Christi, helping people prosper financially through credit score management and different strategies. So I'd like to be involved in both local things as well as abroad.
How did you start on your journey in Yeshua?
The best way to describe my journey in Yeshua was being raised in a Pentecostal or evangelical setting since I was a child. After high school, I started being very drawn to the Hebrew roots, or first century Christianity, as they call it. And so it was about 2002. I have many questions stirring in me, such as, why do we need a Messiah? And, why, if there was a Hebraic context of the New Testament, why wasn't it being talked about? Is the Sabbath still for today? Those type of questions that were pressing in my spirit and in my soul. It led me to go into Luke 24, where the two men on Emmaus Way were traveling. And it's a famous story after Yeshua rose from the dead and appeared to them. And what really stood out was towards the end in verse 27, it says, "And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures and the things concerning himself." So as a believer, as a child and being in the pews all my life, I had to believe this, or, there's certain things that I just had to take on faith. This verse 27 was what got me up and searching, because I have never seen him in the Moses and the prophets or any of that. I had to be honest with myself, almost in a sense of having a crisis of faith, saying if he uncovered the scriptures to these two men, I needed to pursue this and find him in the same light as well. And so with that, I've always known the religious version of a historical figure, what we call Jesus, but seeing Yeshua as the son of Elohim and getting to know him from a Hebraic context was quite a journey for me. And so I do feel that after leaving my hometown, I went up to North Carolina and the Blue Ridge Mountains and found a place of refuge and place to clear these ideas. And Abba really has blessed me for many, many years. It's been over 15 years now. And it seems like every season there's a new insight into seeing Yeshua from the Torah and the prophets, from Moses and the prophets, and then even now seeing the New Testament come back to life for me was something that is very important on this journey to see Yeshua.
How can you see when you were growing up in the church as sort of like being the building blocks to your awakening to Torah?
Yeah, it definitely gave me a point of reference. There are many things that were taught, and I really value the spiritual warfare and the insight that was given while I was in the traditional church, and it allowed me to really seek him more. And it was through those means of spiritual warfare and sanctification that I started seeing more and more insights into how he lived, how Yeshua lived in the first century, how the disciples lived, what exactly did it mean for them to be walking in spirit. And so I do feel like it gave me a great foundation into that. And so finding him in the Torah, and then now with discovering the feasts and everything, it was just a much deeper and richer meaning that I had ever seen before.
The listeners out there, they've gotten familiar with you by listening to your music, and obviously you've hearing your music, I can tell you've been at it for quite some time. So you probably started that in the church setting.
Well, to be honest, when I was in the traditional church growing up, and as I became more aware of what I felt like I was called to do, it was in the late 90s. I did not sing or play an instrument. I never even touched a guitar until I was 22. I started off managing Christian bands locally and finding venues for everyone else. So I managed, I promoted, I helped network, did a couple of festivals and little coffee house gigs. Back in the time, in that time period, Christian music or Christian rock or an alternative type of music wasn't so welcomed. It is now. It's a lot more mainstream and common, but back in those days, it wasn't quite embraced by many. It wasn't until after 2000, 2002, I started to slowly, ease into the music and trying to find that identity, doing a couple of covers, songs that I grew up with, but nothing seemed to gel. I even started leading worship in a Hebrew congregation or a Messianic congregation in the early 2000s, and I didn't really feel like I was called to do other music. There was a new song always brewing in me. I didn't really know how to pursue it because I didn't have experience as a songwriter, only playing chords and singing the best I could to other people's music. So it wasn't until about late 2005, 2006 that the music started to come about. It had already been about 3 or 4 years of me being in this Hebraic pursuit or walk. And so it didn't happen right away. And so after that, about 3 years after I really started having the original music come, is when there was quite a collection of songs. And that's what the first project, the Hebraism Music Project, came about in about 2009, 2010 timeframe. So far, I've got about over 54 songs, but I've only released about 10 of them. I'm working on some new music now, but I'm still learning. I think that as time goes on and as every season goes on, there's something new I learn about myself, about my walk, about the music and the style. So that's kind of how it started. I started off supporting others, and I'm looking to get back into that role and helping produce and support others who are out there writing from this perspective, and as well as working on my own. So my roots really are to support communities abroad.
Now, how would you describe your musical style yourself?
That's a great question. I'm still finding that out myself. I do have some inspiration with my children. I have 4 beautiful children, and before and after their births, they inspired me to write. And so there's 4 styles that I do gravitate towards, and one of them is just an acoustic type of style. Another one's going to be like into indie rock or kind of more of a blues or R&B type of roots, just some influences. And then I'm very drawn to world music or Middle Eastern because of a lot of the Hebrew music that I've listened to, or Israeli type of music. And then the last style is going to be cinematic. I do have aspirations of writing for film, and I've had some opportunities in the past to write some instrumental pieces for friends who are doing things on websites. And so with those 4 styles, it really gives me a freedom to not be so bound by just an acoustic guitar or one thing. It really just allows me to venture off, and I don't feel like I need to release lots of albums to keep up with the way the markets are and what's in demand. So even the new music I'm working on right now, I'm still really just praying about when to release it and when to finish things up. I really am blessed to have this freedom to explore 4 different styles.
We sometimes want to try to target what is this music of Ephraim all about. And it seems that the diversity that you actually portray in your music seems to actually resonate, that this is what Ephraim is all about, this variety that you actually manifest in your music. And I really appreciate it.
Well, that's wonderful feedback. I wasn't really sure when I did release it because it is different, and a lot of the original material you have out in the Messianic world seems to gravitate towards more of a worship and congregational, traditional type of music. And that, from what I've been told, and observed, it seems to go over very well, especially in worship settings. So as I'm going through it, I had to be true to what I felt like I was called to do. And I had some close friends encourage me, especially with Ephraim and Ramona Frank, encouraging me along the way. Their friendship and fellowship has been, over the last 10 years, has been an inspiration as well. And the books like Firstborn Factor, it really gave me the freedom to write from a first-person perspective and be honest and tell my story, and to just say, putting myself in the story and singing through scriptures and really experiencing them. And so, friendships like that and fellowship like with Ephraim and Ramona Frank allowed me to have that freedom to not feel like I have to do a certain style or a certain set of songs. And, there may be a season where I'll have some more traditional worship and maybe some collaborative albums in the future. I've got some friends that I could perhaps have some projects with. But for now, I don't believe I'm done just telling the story and having the scriptures, define themselves through the music and allowing for the freedom of having different styles, however it comes out. And so I look forward to that.
When you started walking Hebraically, did this understanding of the two sticks, the restoration of Israel and the two houses, did that pretty much come right at the same time?
It did. One of the things that really grabbed me was because I read the book of Luke for whatever reason. It just really stood out to me. But in Luke 15, as we know, the famous story of the prodigal son, it really began to have a work in me that I had never seen before as a younger brother, being a type of Ephraim, or the northern houses that were scattered and cut off, and the southern house, Judah being the older brother. And, so I wrote a song called Right to Left and in 2003, the summer of 2003. And I remember very vividly just having this story for weeks just resonate. And so I started writing from a perspective, what if the story continued? What if Ephraim, the younger brother, went to the older brother and said, join me in this feast, and, let's get together. And hopefully that it's kind of having some creative liberty to get a pulse of where we're at today, as those are B'nai Yosef or the Ephraimites can humble themselves and approach our older brother Judah in a different light than some of the things that we've done in our past. So later that fall, I went to a Sukkot gathering in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina, and I ended up performing it for 300 people, and did not expect to do that at all. It was quite a unique experience. It was a very new song. It was very raw, but it happened to be very timely. And there happened to be two banners in the congregation hall, and one said Ephraim, one Judah. And it felt like confirmation to see, this insight that I thought maybe I was in error. I'm not really sure if anybody else was really seeing it, but it wasn't until I got in the same room with other people that had the same conviction that it felt very natural. It was a very natural flow. Also, Jeremiah 3:8 really stood out to me. I started reading and looking into why the bill of divorce was given to the northern house and what it would actually take for the northern house to regain covenant. And so that was another thing that really stood out. So Jeremiah 3:8 and Luke 15 were the two things that really grabbed me when looking at the Ephraimite or the B'nai Yosef perspective.
One question, as we go through this experience in our lives where the Father brings us into, let's say, the olive press, and he starts pressing out the oil. And have you seen these times in your life where you've gone through that pressing? And are these the times that the Father has really began to inspire you with music?
Yes, absolutely. Especially the last 4 years or so, I've had some personal things come up that I've taken a little sabbatical from the music. I lost my father in 2013, and I had moved back to Corpus Christi in 2010 after being away for about 8 years. And and really just spending time with family and regrouping and reprioritizing some things. So since 2013 to now, it's just been a little over 4 years. It's been a pressing, but it's also a pressing in. I think there's always going to be a counter. For every plot or attack of the adversary, there's always a counter attack. And when I look at the elements of the kingdom and pressing in, what I've encouraged people, and this is really what has helped me and encouraged me, is the kingdom of heaven, kingdom of Elohim, is not eating and drinking. It's not in the flesh, but it's of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit, from Romans 14. And that really has been the backdrop and the inspiration for the music and this time of pressing or pressing in. That Romans 14 has been a huge inspiration for me. And so when I go about and having music that is being brought during this season, it really starts with the written word, with righteousness. Well, what is upright? What is righteousness? It's an inheritance we get through Yeshua. It's not through our works or any kind of dead works that we happen to commit as human beings. And then you go into the peace element of righteousness, and there's peace, sanctification. It's walking in wholeness. Many times, during times of trouble or tragedy or hardship, we see ourselves struggling with certain things and forgiving one another. And it sounds idealistic, and it sounds like something that we should do as believers. But there's times when we've been hurt by others. There's times when we need that time of healing. But we can't do without walking out in wholeness, without Yeshua and the written word. But the joy element is the regathering for me, the B'nai Yosef, seeing this tapestry of people and of ideas. March 2016 was definitely a restart for me. Being at the National Shabbat in New Braunfels in March of 2016, it really allowed me to reconnect with the joy elements of seeing everyone regathered. It was during a time of really intense personal struggle, and I feel like since then, it's been nearly 2 years now, that it's been a catalyst for me to get back on track and to have some of the new sounds and new music come forward. So it's been an absolute blessing to be walking and pressing into the kingdom.
Now, you said you've been in this walk now for about 15 years. What advice could you give to some of the folks that are just beginning to get into this? What would you say to them out there?
I think the first thing that would be helpful, I believe, is just to be honest. Be honest with yourself and really pursue what you're doing is truth, but also have a sensitivity to others around you. I think it's easy to get into the head knowledge and get into those aspects that really can be grieving at times, because you see others who aren't walking in this truth. And so, there's always going to be a sense of a bit of a rubber band effect. You're going to one thing, and now all of a sudden, you see those around you may not be keeping the feast or keeping Shabbat or wanting to study like, Hebraic ideas or perspectives. But if you remain in a place of peace and really press into the kingdom of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit, you'll find a path that's a little different than those who are pursuing the head knowledge and bringing more strife and contention, because that's really what ends up happening, getting into heated debates with people over beliefs or different ideas. And so I'd say, if you remain honest with yourself and avoid the heated debates and a lot of the strife and contention that's seen online, especially, it's quite a mess at times. I've seen different message boards that really are grieving, arguing over the most petty things, yet it's associated now with Hebrew roots, or it's associated now with this Torah movement. So I believe that if people really are going about, one of the pieces of wisdom was given to me during this time, because I really personally struggled with this, was plowing the fields of love and forgiveness. And it's constantly going and pursuing love and forgiveness. And if we're able to love our neighbor as ourselves, no matter where they're at, and if we're able to walk in forgiveness, we won't let a lot of the strife and contention or bitterness take root. And in my personal walk, I have taken those things, as simple as that may sound. It's actually a very challenging thing in times of trouble. So plowing the fields of love and forgiveness and just being honest, I believe, is something that I would have told myself 15 years ago a lot sooner.
Solomon, I just think that is some very, very good advice for our listeners out there. And even that resonates with myself even as well. We're coming to the end of this interview portion here. Is there any last words that you could leave with our listeners?
Yes, I feel that a lot of us who are in this walk, we end up being in a place feeling a little isolated, maybe if we don't have local fellowship. But I'd like to introduce just the simplicity of how covenant has been presented to us. And that many of us look at covenant and now we're struggling with trying to redefine it, and maybe we've redefined it through perspectives. But if it's presented to us as a place, it's to start pursuing where it began, how it began. And then knowing from Psalm 139, where it says that our Heavenly Father, He formed us in the womb. Jeremiah 1 says that He knew us before we were even formed in the womb. And so I encourage everyone who's pursuing this to go back to the place. Go back to the place where it was you and Abba, the secret place, the uninterrupted place, the place where you're being restored and renewed. Whether or not you have fellowship or not, you're going back to the place of innocence and being restored daily, walking this out daily. And I believe that's one of the biggest struggles with some of the movement is finding fellowship. But I feel encouraged because no matter where I am, I really feel in my heart to go back to the place and allow Abba to move regardless of where I'm at. So I hope that resonates and encourages others, because that's really where the music's going. It's really getting to that place of simplicity and going to the very basics so that Abba can continue to move and we can pursue the kingdom as children and pressing into that.
Solomon, thank you so much for taking the time, spending with us during this interview portion of Reunion Roadmap.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor.
Here is Solomon Lopez singing a new version of Return from the Hebraism Music Project, available at Hebraism.org.
Shalom, 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 Yerushalayim. Shalom, 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 Yerushalayim. Oh, pray for the peace of Yerushalayim. Oh, pray for the peace of Yerushalayim. Shalom, 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 Yerushalayim. Oh, pray for the peace of Yerushalayim. Oh, we've been scattered and we have been torn, but now's the time to return to where we were all, where we were born, where we were born, where we were all born, where we were all born.
Shalom, everybody. Welcome to the mid-rush portion of Reunion Roadmap. This is with you again, David Jones, and with me today is Barry Phillips. Shalom, Barry.
Shalom to you, David. Trust you're well.
Doing great, doing great. We like to hear from people, right?
Sure.
We like to hear the things that are on people's hearts and minds, and it's always good when we get some feedback on some things. And sometimes we address them just emails and things like that, but we got an email from one of the programs we did, a prior program. We addressed things of covenant, and we talked about replacement theology, dual covenant theology, different things, and how we felt there was some error there. But we trying to address everything in a matter of learning grace and mercy towards one another, and because the Father is gracious and merciful towards us, so we need to extend that to one another, because there's a lot of things we don't know, and to pretend like we do know is I don't want to say specifically, but bordering pride and arrogance. So so we strive not to go there. And just understand and admit there are things we don't know. And I think we continually are looking at things. We don't know everything, but here's where we're at. And I kind of throw that in as somewhat of a disclaimer before this program, saying there's a lot of things we still don't know. And we still don't have a lot of the answers, but we want to address something. And it was a great question, some things that were brought out. And we talked about the word that was in the beginning, and Yeshua being the Word, and how the Word does not change. And so when we put our faith in Yahweh, we come to Him because He proclaimed we could. In other words, now we can come to Him. It's saved by grace through faith. Faith in what? Faith in the Father. Faith in Him saying we can come near to Him. So what does this have to do with the sacrifices? What does this have to do? Because now we know that the temple was destroyed shortly thereafter. Yeshua was crucified and resurrected. But there is a time period that's in between there when it still stood. But there was, not much later, it was destroyed. And that left the Jewish people, Israel, without a temple. And because there was no temple, there was no altar, they could make no sacrifice. So what do we do with things like that?
Take it you just handed that huge football off to me and said, "Run with it."
No, just a little bit, just to get us started, and then we can go along the thread.
Well, if we want to talk about the idea of sacrifice, we're translating a particular Hebraic word, more oftentimes korban or korbanot, if you want to do the plural, as sacrifices and offerings. Neither of those two English words fully detail or explain what the word korban means. Sacrifices seems to be, I'm giving up something that's going to cost me a lot. An offering is something that, this is what I'm willing to give you.
Oh, so it's like God's not happy unless I'm suffering.
Or something to that effect, or unless it costs me a bunch. Korban is more an idea of drawing near. It's a means of approaching. It's the path cutter. It's the way maker, if you will. It's the avenue that is established that one can now cross and approach near to Him. Yah said that. And was it Leviticus 10 at the inauguration when Nadav and Abihu had transgressed His presence, ever how they did that? By those that approach me, I will be set apart. So this korban is aiding us in the set apart requirement of approaching Him. Initially, we see, David, in the garden, this transgression is taking place with Adam and Chava, or Eve, and we have surmised by the fact that skin was provided for them, that an animal was slain. It really doesn't say that an animal was slain. It specifically doesn't say that Yahweh took an animal and put it on an altar and burned it to Himself. That scene never is demonstrated for us. But whatever it was that he did, however he procured those skins, he dealt with the sin issue prior to. While they were still feebly trying to cover themselves in fig leaves, Yah's dealing with their stuff and finding out what their transgression is. And it's not that he didn't know, but he's helping them to understand, you sinned, you violated my decree, my law, and this is the consequence of that. Now that we dealt with that, I will cover you.
Yeah, the wages of sin is death. And there had to be the issue of sin addressed with ahead of time, like you said, which brings out a really great point in all of this. If we look at the context of the offering system, the drawing near system that was put in the book Vayikra Leviticus, at what point in the timeline did that happen? That happened while they were, when he was telling them, this is what I want you to do. They were still in the wilderness, and they had already come out of Egypt and already been to Mount Sinai. So here's a thought. When God said, I am going to bring you out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, he said, I am redeeming you. And he told Moshe at the burning bush that there's 4 things I'm going to do for you, and all these are an act of redemption. I am redeeming you, and then bringing you to the mountain to receive my covenant. So before these offerings were even an issue with the people, really, as a group of people called Israel, and this whole system was put into place, God first redeemed them and brought them to covenant.
So I see then from what you're saying that the worship through sacrifice, or korban, is just it's an act of worship based on an established relationship.
Right. It was given not to this. There was nowhere in the sacrifices where it says, so if you do this, I will forgive you. I don't really see it in that context. I don't really find anything that really says that. Now, there were things that were brought for forgiveness, but there were only 2 offerings that dealt with sin like that. And the issue at hand was the person had to show teshuvah before they could even bring an offering. Otherwise, it would be invalid. So forgiveness had to be sought out before the person could even approach.
Okay, I'm going to muddy some water here real big. Forgive me. And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but as you say that, something just hit me here. For the first time that I see that Yah says, I forgive, I will forgive your sin, is when Moshe is asked to see his glory, and he's hidden in the cleft of the rock. This is after the gold calf fiasco. Yah says, I will forgive your sin. Up until that moment, what had been employed was, in the day that you sin, you shall die. Moshe comes down with the commandments in his hands and sees Israel sinning. He breaks that covenant. Those covenant stones, he throws them down and they're broken. Because if he comes back down with that, these people are going to die. They're sinning. He comes back up and there is a renewed set of stones, a renewed covenant based on the fact Yah says, I choose to forgive you. Not based on you, but based on my own character, based on myself.
Now that's pretty cool, because we have Moshe going up to make intercession for the people.
He did.
I think that's a big issue there at hand too, because he's asking to forgive the sins of the people, but he's also laying his own life on the line there as well, in reference to the golden calf.
So in reference, David, to Yeshua, we have taught and preached about his atoning work on the tree. I'm good with that. I don't know that we fully understand that yet, but I'm good with that idea. However, when 4 men tore a roof off and let down a paralytic in front of Yeshua, his first dealing with the man was not his paralysis, but rather he said, son, your sins are forgiven you. And there was an argument among the religious leaders in that setting. How dare he say he can do that? For no one can forgive sins but Elohim. Wait a minute. How could Yeshua do that if he could, by decree, forgive one's sins? Why did he go to the tree? Why die? Why didn't he just decree, as he did for that man, everyone's sins are now forgiven? He was forgiving sins. He forgave the woman who was of ill repute. Go and sin no more, he told her.
Right, which is a teshuvah for her.
So his dying on the tree, we have this Talmudic understanding of how the temple changed. The Yom Kippur, the core didn't turn white, and the lots didn't come up for Israel as they had, and the doors of the temple opened on their own accord, and so forth. We have those references as an idea. Well, that Messiah dying on the cross or on the tree did away with all of that. Yeshua was able and did forgive people of their sin before he went to the cross or the tree. There was more to it than forgiving the world of their sins, that for the reason that he died. And we're not going to be able to capture that in this next 4 minutes. So maybe that's for the future. But I want to address something other that we were talking about. This idea of the veil rending, and therefore the temple is no longer necessary. The Jews don't have a means through sacrifice to approach him anymore. Yeshua can decree their sins forgiven, as he did before he ever went to the tree. Can he not?
Right, as was done at the mountain when Yahweh told Moshe the same.
Yes. Now that does not...
No, I think the question comes into our observance of that. Like we said, God redeemed them before he gave them his Torah written, and he redeemed them before he instituted the sacrificial system. He redeemed them before all of these things, and we've kind of got the cart before the horse, so to speak. We look backwards and think, oh, this is how they felt they were redeemed, or this is how they approached redemption, and that's not really the case. The redemption was before all of these things, and I think one of the things is our understanding of how we observe certain things. And that's where I'm like, we were really incomplete in our understanding. One of my examples on this is Rav Shaul. We talk about his conversion experience, and I don't see where he said, I converted to Christianity. He said the way that he was doing things before was wrong. That he has now seen things. He said, he served the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he went from serving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, though albeit wrong, he was zealous. But now he serves the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what happened there? Was there a conversion, or did he make teshuvah, repentance, and saying, I was in error?
I think it comes down, and that's an excellent point. I think the emailer's question, it basically comes down to, do our brothers of Yehuda need Yeshua? And my understanding is, yes, they do, and yes, they will find him. But it does not mean that they are rejected until Yah showed mercy on you and I before we even knew his right name, before we understood it, as Rav Shaul didn't understand how to properly serve him. He loved us. He dealt with us. He brought us to the place to where we are now. Are we there yet? No, we're still in our process. While we're in our process, let's give them the same latitude and opportunity to grow in their process as well.
That's great, Barry. There are many who are looking for the Messiah, and even now, and they're just not seeing some of the things in the way that we're seeing them. I believe it's the Father who draws people, and if they're looking for him, he's drawing them. And he says, if you search me wholeheartedly, you will find me.
Absolutely. Well, we're running out of time here, and we love your questions, comments. If you want to reach us, it's Reunion Roadmap at B'naiYosefNA.com.
Sounds great. Guys, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Shalom.
Shalom.
You just heard Born at Home by Solomon Lopez. Our next piece is also by Solomon. It's called Origin. Solomon is premiering these two instrumentals right here on Reunion Roadmap. To hear more of his music, go to Hebraism.org. And now, Origin.
You've just heard the instrumental Origin by Solomon Lopez, and we've also heard a midrash, which was very challenging, I'm sure, with some of our listeners. When I heard that midrash, what came to me is that sometimes we really overcomplicate things when it comes to Scripture.
Stefania, that is quite true. There's a reason that our God says we have to become like children to enter the kingdom of heaven, because children don't complicate things. We grow up and we get smart and we just make it more complicated than it needs to be. But to hear Barry and David discuss the subject of sacrifices and forgiveness of sin, and it really did present a challenging perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then to come up with the standpoint is that he is sovereign and he can do what he wants to do. And so often with us that we have to, even our personal lives, we have to remind ourselves of that. He is actually sovereign, and we need to place ourselves up there on the altar and say to him, you are sovereign, do what you need to do.
Well, that's the truth. And we also have to do that with things we don't understand.
Yes.
As in, let God be God and let God be mysterious.
Yes.
don't even think about that we may have figured him out. And to go back to the subject of sacrifices, that's a thing which we too often have done. I know you and I, growing up in the church in our different church traditions, we learned that sacrifices were all about sin.
Yes.
And the reason that the sacrifices happened in the Old Testament days was because the blood of the animals took care of that sin or covered it. Well, Barry and David are explaining something a little different there. And that's something else that I have begun to learn, but I still sure don't know the full tale. But to realize, as our elders have said, that God pronounced forgiveness at Mount Sinai before he instituted the sacrificial system, or the offering system, as I've come to call it, that Yeshua pronounced forgiveness on that paralytic before the cross. It makes you want to go back and rethink it.
And what comes to mind there, too, is that he exists outside of time. And so often we want to put him into our little box of being restricted to time like we are.
Well, that's right. He is outside of time. And, you know, for those who might be saying, well, what are we doing? Diminishing the work of Yeshua on the cross here? No, not at all. Not at all. The forgiveness still comes from God alone. The question we might have is, maybe we didn't understand completely the way he does it. So it doesn't diminish whatsoever the work of our Messiah. Neither does it diminish that work of the offerings on the altar in the temple. Somehow these two are a combined picture of the protocols by which we approach our God. And that is more of a mystery that gives me a sense of his sovereignty even greater than I knew before.
Yes, and there's that other verse that talks about that he died before the foundations of the world. And that, lends itself to really meditate upon, and perhaps that starts explaining some of what David and Barry were talking about.
Right. Now, even though our God exists outside of time, we don't. And that means our time for this program has come to an end. So, Zephaniah, thank you for the good work you did with the interview with Solomon. And for all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this edition of Reunion Roadmap. This is Al McCarn saying Shavua Tov, and join us again next week.
Thank you for joining us on Reunion Roadmap, a production of B'nai Yosef North America. Please come back next week for another visit with the people of the emerging house of Joseph here in North America.